So what I wanted to do was to kind of tell you guys, I guess, a bit about why I landed up on this track. What to me is inspiring, interesting about this conversation around trauma and violence. So I said briefly yesterday that I'm from Nepal. I grew up there. I still live there. We had a decade of civil war, although it was just, there was an insurgent guerrilla group and there was just conflict with the state. And that was just for me my first exposure to large scale violence, extortion, fear. And it really struck me that you could meet them and they were just ordinary people. I mean, if you bumped into them in the grocery line, you wouldn't look back. Right? They didn't look different. There wasn't anything fundamentally different about them. And still, they could do things that we just could not understand. And it seemed to me like a micro version of that happens all the time. People do stuff that I just can't understand, right? And for me, with an understanding of the principles, which is still very, very new to me. One of the first things that happened was that, yes, I wanted to make changes to like stats around violence, to crime, yes, I wanted to make changes there, but I also realized I had all these preconceptions about violence, violent people. I had all these ideas about violence that really had nothing to do with the human beings behind them. Right? So that I had somehow in my head had this idea that no, there's a category of people who are like that, right? And I had been just unable really to see the humanity in them. And to be fair, it's not like I tried to, I didn't, or I wanted to or anything. I mean, I just decided that they were wrong and they were just different. And at some point I began to see how much, like, you know, when you're like their age, and like an adult tells you to do something for your own good.
Yeah, right.
I mean, instinctively, it might be for your own good, but you don't care because it's annoying when people come at you and want to change you, right? Yeah. It's just, it doesn't matter how they say it, and they can say it nicely or harshly or yell at you. It doesn't matter. You can sense when people are talking to you with the sole intention of wanting you to be different, right? Mm-hmm. And that just really hit me that I had this, I wanted them to be different. And in doing that, I had got in my own way, right? Got in the way of the kind of society I wanted to see and the kind of society I wanted to live in. That I was kind of accusing them of a kind of violence and intolerance, but I was also being my own kind of violent and intolerant, right? And so for me, what really struck me about violence and the way I saw it was my own blindness to it. And really a kind of societal blindness we have to it, that we don't see our part in the society we live in. We don't see our part in the culture we create around us. That it looks to us like, oh, it's other people, or it's those people. And yeah, I mean, I might not have done anything that you can like draw up a rap sheet for, but it doesn't mean I haven't played a part in creating a culture of fear, or a culture of intolerance, right? And I realized that increasingly, with reference to trauma and violence, but on a larger scale, that ultimately change in that is going to have to come from personal understanding. That individuals are going to have some way to turn the lens inward and see from where we're operating, the place from where we're operating, right? Because just like the teenager who you can tell all kinds of things that is good for them and they don't give a shit. Because nobody likes to be talked to like that, right? Nobody likes to be talked to with this attitude of, I clearly know better. I know you won't acknowledge it, but I do, right? And it doesn't matter whether you say it explicitly or not. You can sense that, this kind of righteousness that people come at you with, right? And we do that. We do that with reference to what we would call perpetrators of, on a sliding scale of aggression or violence. But we do that. We come at them. Right? And it's a failure on our part to understand. It's a failure on our part to see humanity in people. And for me, what I realized was it was no longer to me an ethical choice of like, oh, I should see the human. It was just obvious that I had just been blind to it for a really long time. And that in seeing my own part in it and seeing some of my own blindness around that, it changed how I showed up and how I talked to people, and therefore how much they changed, because they were free, right? They were just free to be themselves. And in my being less blind around them, they were less blind about themselves, right? Because ultimately they had to see that what they were doing was not what they wanted to be doing. And they wouldn't see it if I just kept pointing a finger at them. They had to see it for themselves. They had to see themselves for themselves, right? And that could only happen by me being willing to see myself and to see all the layers that I've brought to the table and being willing to unsee those. Then there's room for them to see themselves differently, for them to understand themselves differently, and ultimately to show up differently. So that's my 2 cents to begin.
I wanted to share just for a minute how I came into this understanding and the setting that brought me this way, and how my experience of violence and traumatic situations impacted that journey. I took a job, gosh, it's been 22 years ago now, in community development. We all know our president past was involved in community building and community development work. But when I went looking for the job, I had in my mind that it was about getting people together like we're doing here and changing the feeling of a place, that people were happier and more engaged. But what I learned, having hired on to be the community development director of this one community in Charlotte, was that the funding for that work, primarily federal funding and matching city funds, was not for the people at all. It was to fix the streets, to put in stormwater, to rebuild a park, to put in sidewalks, to establish a preschool, and to build houses or rebuild houses. And it really had very little to do with how the people related to each other. And during those first 10 years, we were successful on the fronts that we were told to work in. At the time I started in Lakewood, it was, and officially from the police department, the worst place to live. Highest crime rate of anywhere in the city, drugs, prostitution, and violence. And we had an extremely high rate of violent crimes. Everything from domestic violence to murders. It was very rare prior to our coming there that there was a year that you only had one murder. And we actually lost our community youth worker who lived directly across from the church where most of our activities took place. She was murdered in her own home. So we have, as they say, seen the bodies on the streets. But during those 10 years, we rebuilt half the houses in the whole neighborhood. And we got stormwater and sidewalks and curbs and, rebuilt the park and built a preschool. And the preschool was 5-star. I mean, it was as high as you could get. But to ask anyone in the neighborhood what had changed, I don't know of anyone who would have said other than, nothing's changed. It's still the worst place to live. And the police agreed. It was still the highest crime rate. When someone showed us the book Modelo, and I went to look for Roger, and we put together a grant from the Kellogg Foundation, and we were able to engage Amy and Roger, and ultimately a number of us from the community ourselves doing the training. And we did that for 3.5 years. And I noticed for myself that things might have been changing a little bit because I wasn't getting as many phone calls for me to call the police, because no one in the community would ever call the police. I mean, you don't snitch on somebody. It puts you in danger. I mean, this is serious stuff. But I noticed I wasn't getting as many of those type calls. And the police came to us one time. It was a interview or site visit, if you will, for a grant that we were applying for. And the police officer shared with the group we were meeting with, said, things have really changed over here. We've noticed a big difference. And one of the interviewers said, well, I need to ask you a question. What is it that has changed? Tell me, how do you know it's changed? And I remember so distinctly, Kenny answered. He said, in his typical Southern drawl, he said, well, ma'am, it's real simple. We're getting the phone calls. They weren't having to call me. They were taking their neighborhood back. They were beginning to make the phone calls directly to the police. The violent crime rate in those 3 years, reported from the police, had dropped by 80%. And all we did was have dinners with people, and we'd sit around and chat. Once a month, twice a month. Occasionally we'd have a little group for teenagers that we'd come and talk about. It was anger. It wasn't anger management. It was just, what is anger, Where does it come from? And the experience that they had in those type of settings was one of, oh, the other people that live here are just like me. and they began seeing each other differently. And yes, there was still crime, and there's still crime today. But name any neighborhood in this country that doesn't have drugs and all these things going on. But they saw it differently. The clearest example of how people began to come together was one of the dinners that we had. These two elderly black women saw each other at this dinner, and they went up to each other and said, "What are you doing here?" And the response was, "Well, I live over on such and such street, but what are you doing here?" So, "Oh, well, I live over on this street." These two women had been in church together for 30 years, but were ashamed to say where they lived and did not know that they lived 2 blocks apart. Mm-hmm. To me, what was so transformative for me about having been introduced to the principles and the understanding of how we function was that I had been the person that had to do everything. I was the only one getting paid. And I had all these bricks on my shoulders about we have to do, we have to fix, we have to put in new water, we have to put in street, all of this work. But what I realized was that it wasn't on me. The people that lived there would make the kinds of changes that needed to be made in that community from their own engagement and their own wisdom. And that is what made the change when people were given that freedom, given that responsibility, but they assumed it because they knew who lived near them, related to them differently, and they began to take their community back. They saw the violence not only as unnecessary, but something they didn't have to live with. And so it changed the community from the inside out. And so for me, this session is about how we see violence and how we see traumatic events and how we respond, whether individually or as a community. So I think if we explore that in these times, it'll help us see things.
Okay, well, I've been asking myself, why is it now at this point in my life that I devote so much of my time to working with abused women, veterans with PTSD, homeless veterans, homeless women, women that have been trafficked after spending years doing basically public trainings and corporate consulting and academic teaching and a lot of things that were different. And I think it's because I can divide my adult life in 2 parts, and I would call them before the principles and after the principles. And I would say that my entire adult life has been filled with trauma and violence, not to me personally, but the year that I left for college, John Kennedy became president. And we were young and he was young, and we were so filled with hope and joy that this wonderful young idealist, brilliant man was going to be president. And in my sophomore year in college, he was murdered. Senselessly in a way that none of us could understand. And that was shocking. One of the great heroes of my life was Martin Luther King. In 1968, Martin Luther King was murdered. I was teaching at a junior college in Mississippi the year that Martin Luther King was murdered. The day that he was murdered, I didn't know that. I'd been teaching, and I was driving home, and I stopped in a convenience store to buy some cereal and milk. And there were 5 people in that convenience store saying, "Thank God that stupid nigger is dead." And I'm thinking, who are they talking about? What's going on? And I was afraid to say anything because, I was like, not one of them, and I was scared. And I kind of hid in the cereal aisle, and I was listening in, and I realized it was Martin Luther King, and I rushed out of the store and just sat in my car and wept because he was our fondest hope for peace and for a successful revolution in the civil rights area. I was a civil rights activist. I was an anti-war activist. I was a women's activist. I was a hippie chick. I did the whole deal, And I was so traumatized myself by what I saw human beings doing to human beings and the way people talked and the way people acted. And I was hopeless. I was hopeless and stressed and unhappy. And I felt like the world was a very unfriendly place and that there was no love in the world. I was married to a person who was a very good person, but he was insecure, and he had a need to be psychologically abusive so that he could be important. And I didn't realize that, but it colored my experience for the first half of my adult life. And I was a woman in a man's workplace. I was sexually harassed up to this day. That's a true statement, but when I was young, it was worse. And I went through all of this, and I was like, what the hell kind of world is this? I didn't want to have a baby. For a long time, I fought having a baby because I didn't want to bring a child into this cruel and horrible world where these terrible things were happening. And finally, biology took over, and I did. And I remember the last week of my pregnancy was the week that the last of the prisoners of war came home from Vietnam, and I thought, oh, thank God, peace. Of course, that was short-lived.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I really believed maybe there's hope, that my little baby, whoever it's going to be, will be born into a world in which they can experience peace, but that didn't happen. But I can tell you what did happen to me is when I discovered and fell into the principles, and my first teacher was one of my clients. I was running a business, and Bill Pettit, Dr. Bill Pettit, who a lot of you I'm sure know or know of, was one of my clients, because as wonderful as a psychiatrist as he is, business was not his forte. And when I started to understand that I was creating my experience of the violence that was going on in the world, my life changed completely. Now, the world didn't change. It's even more violent now than it was then. But my level of hopefulness and my belief that at any moment something could change completely changed my life, because I could be at peace inside myself despite what was going on around me. I wasn't hinging my happiness and my life decisions on, other people fixing the world or me coming up with a fix for the world, because you can't fix the world, but you can definitely fix yourself. And if every single person in the world did that, if every single person came to peace within themselves, there would be no more violence and trauma. And so my goal is to take people that feel as hopeless as I felt into my heart and into my life, and to love them and share their humanity with them and let them see that they can be at peace despite what's happened to them, no matter what. And when they find peace within themselves, they can help other people. And other people will find peace, and sooner or later, it'll happen. You know, and I remember I was having lunch in New York one time with a friend of mine from high school who worked for Deutsche Bank, and he was telling me that he was in Germany when the Berlin Wall came down. And he said, you know, it was the most amazing thing, because the reason that wall came down is that people were just sick of it. And he said, you know, it's not like there was a big movement, it's not like there was a big historical, you know, effort, it's not like there were people trying to negotiate treaties. He said the people in East Germany were just tired of it. And thousands of them stormed the wall, and there were guards all along the wall, and they were the East German communist guards, and their instructions were to shoot people who tried to scale the wall. Well, if one person tried to scale the wall, they would shoot them. If 5 people tried to scale the wall, they would shoot them. They couldn't bring themselves to shoot thousands of people. They couldn't do it. And they defied their orders. They were being told, and he knew this from a German friend of his who was, you know, knowledgeable. And he said they were being told by their superiors, shoot them all, and they just couldn't, because that would have been a massacre. And something in them said, you can't just shoot 1,000 people trying to climb a wall, you know, that's wrong. And I thought to myself, you know, if 1,000 people demonstrate for peace, if 10,000 people, if 1 million people stand up for peace and stand up for the end of cruelty, it'll happen, because they can't shoot us all.
Can't shoot us all.
You know, and that's really true. That story really touched my heart, you know, when he told me that story, because I thought, oh my God, that's so true. You know, at a certain point, you reach critical mass of people who say, no more, that's enough, I've had it. And I think that's really, to me, what the principles represent. It represents the possibility of people finding the courage to speak out for peace, for kindness, for love, for generosity, for compassion, for seeing beyond our differences, because the cause of trauma is insecurity. The only reason there's violence in the world is because people are trying to cling on to what's theirs and they're afraid of losing something, or because they think their beliefs are more important than their humanity, or because they feel like my husband, bless his heart, and we're still friends. I mean, I know now, looking back on it, even though I divorced him, I know now, I probably didn't have to, because he was just insecure and I wasn't helping him to be less insecure. Because his insecurity took the form of arrogance. And I didn't know enough about how the human mind worked to know that arrogance was the flip side of insecurity. So I thought he was just arrogant, you know, and I made up this thing that he doesn't really respect me, and, you know, it's just not gonna work out. And now he's happily married to somebody else. I'm not worried, it worked out. But what I'm saying is that we do things in life based on our beliefs and our ideas about the way people are, the way we are. And then when we find peace of mind, really deep peace of mind, we go, what the hell was I thinking? You know? And that's what I see, honestly, that's what I see primarily in the veterans I work with, you know, who are struggling with PTSD and the effects of the terrible wars that we've had over and over again. It's like, what the hell was I doing? You know? I had one person in my group one time who just broke down and was just sobbing because he was shooting at a person he thought he was a terrorist, and he instead shot the child that was with them. Accidentally, he didn't mean to. But the person was standing there next to their child, and he shot the child instead of the terrorist. And he can't sleep, he can't eat, he can't do anything. He's a wreck because he shot a child. When is the time going to come when we're a wreck because we shot a human being? You know, I mean, I would never say that to him, but that's the essence of it. What is the point of killing people? You know, it's like I'm asking myself, what other species does that? You know, I watch all these National Geographic videos, and I love these animal things, and you know, it's not like the elephants are running around killing the other elephants. You know, the male elephants fight over a female. They don't fight to the death. You know, one of them is stronger than the other, and he gets the woman, and that's cool. But, you know, But they don't like, I'm going to kill that elephant and then trample him, and then kill his brother and his other brother and the other friends of his because they're against me. I mean, there's something in our thinking that is so deeply insecure that power has become more important than peace. And to me, that's trauma and violence are coming from that place. And it's everywhere. It's throughout. There is no segment of society. Honest to God, I've had rich women in my office, really wealthy women who lived a great life in a beautiful neighborhood and had everything they ever wanted, who would unbutton their blouse and show me the scars from where their husbands consistently beat them. It's not like it has nothing to do with economic status or social status or culture. When people are insecure, they do horrible things to each other. Mm-hmm. And when people are not insecure, it would never dawn on them. Never, never, never. So the cure is to cure insecurity. To the degree that we can find it in our hearts to become secure enough ourselves to confront the insecurity in other people and help them to see beyond it, we will have peace. And trauma and violence will be a thing of the past, and people will be looking back going, God, what a barbaric era. What was going on then? Now people can say, well, people have been like that from the beginning of time. I don't care. They can still change. That's the thing with the principles. It's not about time. It's about that moment. So that's what drew me to talk about this and to tell you about the people that I work with, because bless their hearts, they're victims of all of our thinking. And I'll tell you briefly one thing. So one of the girls that I worked with who, had been trafficked. I was having coffee with her not too long ago, and we agreed that the problem was that she'd had a really bad job, and she shouldn't have taken that job, but she did. But now she had a better job, and she's going to be her mom. She's going to be a mom again and have her kids back and do different work, and that's behind her. And that's all it was a really bad choice that she made in a moment of fear and panic when she was being brutalized by a person stronger than her. And, when she first came into this, she thought she was damaged for life. There is nobody, who can damage your soul? The soul is untouchable. Nobody can touch it. I don't care what they do to your body. I'll tell you one last funny little incident. So I had this woman that came to me who had been physically abused by her husband for 50 years. She was an older woman and she'd been married for 50 years. And he abused her starting on the night of their honeymoon. And she was a very devoutly religious, fundamental person. And she stayed with him. And he was one of those guys that, is really nice in the neighborhood and all the people think he's wonderful and he's Mr. Helpful Handyman. And at home, he was a violent abuser. And she never told anybody because she didn't want to embarrass him. And so I said to her, what kept you with this man for 50 years? And she said, well, ma'am, she said, I am a devout Christian woman. I made a vow in sickness and in health, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer. And I keep that vow because it won't be long now when this will be over. And I will go to heaven and he will go to hell and I'll never have to see him again. I worked for her. But it's hard for me not to go, oh my God. But I mean, people just, it's funny the degree to which instead of resolving it, we put up with it because the culture tells us, hey, that's how it is. There's violent bad people and then there's the good people. And hey, no, there's just people living at different levels of security and insecurity. There's no evil people, there's just people with evil thoughts. And there's no really excellent people either. They're just people with excellent thoughts. We're all just people. And we're all doing what we can, the best we can with what we know. And the thing that I've gained from my exposure and involvement in the principles, which is closing in on 35 years now, is the faith that we are all perfectly okay. Every single person on this planet. And everybody deserves love, respect, and understanding. And there's nobody undeserving. And until we all see that, and that starts here, you got to see it for yourself. You know, if you're running around criticizing yourself, you're doing violence to yourself. You know? But when you see, I'm fine, I'm doing the best I can, I'm just a person like everybody else, there's nobody special. There's no star-bellied sneetches, as Dr. Seuss told us all when we were little. It's just people. And that awakens our sense of innocence, you know? I mean, if you put a bunch of babies on the floor in a room, they're not going to sort themselves out by race and creed and color and, you know, beauty and ugliness. And they don't give a damn. They just want to play. You know, we're born to be happy. And I always tell people, just look at babies. That's the package you were sent in with, you know. Now, what you did with that package, that's your problem. It's your thinking. But the package you came with was pure, sweet, loving, forgiving, change in a dime, look for happiness, be joyful package. That's the human race. And nobody's winning that one. So that's why I'm here.
So we want to engage you in this same discussion. We've shared a bit with you of how we have experienced violence, various levels. We've experienced trauma from earthquakes to murders to tremendously troubled veterans. What have you experienced, and how do you see it now? Do you see it any differently because of your understanding? Have things changed for you at all? Just share with us. We don't have a microphone up here.
Or
but
even what
there
drew
oh, you
you
got
to
it.
come here?
Anita's got it. So.
What drew you to come to track on trauma and violence?
Yeah. Zelda.
Just because of my SAP.
You can wait for the mic.
Yeah.
Oh, she
I
cut.
can't use them.
But you,
I won't be able, is that okay? I can't, can I stand?
Yeah, you can stand, but the problem is they need the mic
Yeah.
for
The
the
live
people
stream
that are
will
watching
need
on
it.
live stream.
The live stream will need
Okay,
it.
so I'm not gonna share. I'll pass then, that's okay.
Really?
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
I don't want to be an inconvenience to anybody. I can't.
If she holds the mic, is it, no, it's not
the
okay?
same.
All right.
It's
There's
Yeah,
some-
Heather, over here. Anita? Yeah.
Oh, sure, I can do that. Is that okay?
yeah.
Yeah, sure, sure.
No, I
No,
know.
can't do that.
Tell someone and then they can say it to my,
Okay.
so, but they know about the people online.
Yeah,
Well, they know they're going to hear it.
know.
It's okay.
They will hear it.
Thank you so much. So I actually grew up in a very abusive home, and I've had my journey, and now my mother hasn't changed, but the way she's the only one. I mean, I'm the only one that she confide in and talk, and I have this amazing relationship with her today. I have this beautiful relationship with her, and I know that she really, like, whatever seemed abusive was really coming, a lot of times it's coming from her fear and insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
And also, you know, like she told me, you're going to Charlottesville, I heard some terrible things. Lately, did you hear what happened, this anti-Semitic thing in the university here? You shouldn't go, it's terrible. I'm really upset.
Mm-hmm.
And like, you know, I used to, like, in the past, I would get all defensive and say, you don't know anything. And I was like, oh my gosh, she loves me. She's worried about me. She's concerned. And I had to go because the baby was crying, and I said, look, Mom, I'm going to call you back. And then I was like, okay, I have to try to figure out how to talk to now. I was like, 1 second. Let me just be like open, you know, like let just like the world, the universe, God, take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out, I called her back, and she was a different person. She was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited for you. Oh my gosh, so the kids, I was already in Charlottesville, and I guess, she herself had like a
Change of heart.
King.
Yeah.
It was amazing, and I didn't do anything to change that.
Mm-hmm.
And to this day, I love my mother dearly. I understand everything that happened, all the trauma and everything. I was very resentful of that. But when I worked, all these years that I had a spiritual quest and found an aid health, it completely changed for me.
Yeah.
And my first marriage was also a very recent marriage, and today I just have compassion and understanding for my ex-husband, and I'm able to have a healthy marriage today because of the understanding.
That's great.
Okay, so for
Sorry,
those
that was a mouthful.
for those who are live streaming, in a nutshell, what she shared was very beautiful. That although she had grown up with a parent who was very abusive, or with a household where there was a lot of abuse, in this day now, with her understanding, she loves her mother. She understands her insecurity. She understands where she's coming from. She doesn't take it seriously, and she can look back on events in her life and see what was going on with the other person, and that they can change in a moment, just as she changed when she started to see the principles. I hope I'm summarizing this satisfactorily. And it was very beautiful that she shared that her life has changed completely because she saw something beyond judgment of other people and their judgments of her. So,
Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you for
Thank
sharing.
you so much.
So did you want to share, Heather?
Yes.
Well, wait for the mic, please. Yeah, it's coming.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so my question, I was thinking about the story you told about the person who could not forgive himself for killing the child,
Yeah.
as an accident. So I know that we say that we're all, we don't need fixing, but how would you help him to have peace with himself? Because that's something he couldn't control, he couldn't change it, it was done.
Yeah.
So how would you facilitate him helping himself so that he could sleep at night, so that he could have
Yeah.
peace?
Well, I don't know what insight he will get. I know that if I can share with him what the past is, the thing about the past is you can't fix the past. Whatever's done is done. It's cooked. It's like I always use the example when I do groups with women. It's like if you bake a bad cookie, you can't get those ingredients back and start over. You have to start with new ingredients. It's not like you can unbake the cookie and go, okay, I'm going to start again. And so all of us have bad cookies in our past. We all have these things that we've created that are, whether by accident or by intent, they're done. So his journey is to find deep enough peace inside himself to really see that if he had, in his case, if he had known that he was going to kill the child, he wouldn't have done it. He did something that he now can't forgive himself for, but when he was doing it, he wasn't intentionally doing it. That's number one. He doesn't realize that. He thinks, he basically thinks I shouldn't have been there, but he had no choice about that either. But the other piece of it is that even if he had done it intentionally, there are people, we work with people that have committed terrible crimes, and have committed murder, who have to come to peace with the fact that I can't change that. But now, today, I can find peace inside myself and never, ever, help other people not to make that same mistake, help people to see how not to get into a state of mind where that makes sense to you. How to, and that's really where it comes from. It comes from people seeing that every day is a fresh start. And for the rest of your life, you can do the best you can to make certain that things are different for you. But there are things we have to just accept. We've done things. And who hasn't, And for some people, I think there's a lot of people out there in the therapeutic community who is like, like one person said to me, well, couldn't he reframe that? And I'm going like, how do you reframe murdering a child? Come on. You can't. That's an unreasonable request. It's saying, can I trick myself into thinking I didn't do something that I know I did? But you can know you did something and know the innocence of that moment and know that that isn't your spirit, that isn't your soul, that isn't your heart. And that deep down, you have another chance to come to peace and live the kind of life that helps other people come to peace and get beyond those things. You know, I think we think that we should fix the past. You can't fix the past. But, you know, I see you shaking your head, Helen. You got stories like that, a lot to share, because you can't fix the past. But you can become a person who would never, ever live that past again. And then you're free. And if the whole world, I mean, the whole world we can't fix our history. You know, we'll never be able to fix the cruelty of all the things that went on in no civil rights and brutality to various groups and subgroups in our population. We can't make that right. It was terrible. It's going to be terrible historically forever. But we can make the future different. We can make ourselves bring ourselves to a place of understanding where it would be unthinkable to do that ever again. Mm-hmm. And then we live in a different world. And we've learned from our past. And I always tell people, you know, the best teacher is your worst moment. Mm-hmm. You know, because that's where we learn. Anyone else? Can I share? Yeah, Audrey.
Okay, I'm going to try to be focused, because I'm just so in love with the three principles. I've grown in so many ways from it. I've known about the three principles for maybe 10 or 15 years, kind of knew about it. But I didn't really appreciate it until my granddaughter, who is 19 years old, committed suicide. Mm. And I'm originally from New York. She'd moved from New York to Florida. She loved being around me. She had her own apartment, and we were great. We were great together. We would go to breakfast and lunch, and she went off to her jobs. But there were things she didn't share with me, and I did not know about some of her pain. And then one day I get a phone call from her mom, who's in New York, screaming and yelling in the phone. And her name was Ty, saying, "Ty's dead! Ty's dead!" And I'm like, what? What do you, Ty just saw her. What do you mean she's dead? And when that happened, I always was comfortable and peaceful and loving and kind, but when that happened, I was severely traumatized. Not only was I in pain and shock, but I was thinking about my daughter. And I was miserable. I was so miserable. I was really, really miserable. And I kept saying, well, I have to get myself together because I have to help my daughter. But I kept asking myself questions like, why did she do that? Why didn't she tell me? Why did she do this? Why did she do that? How? Maybe I could have done something. All these questions I kept asking myself, which was making myself feeling more and more miserable. And when I began to really appreciate the three principles, is I realized I was driving myself crazy and becoming more traumatized by my thoughts about things that I had no control over. She was gone. Well, I don't believe she's gone. I believe she's back home with, with God. But when that awareness came to me through my understanding of the three principles, I felt so wonderful. I was liberated. And I felt so liberated, and that's why I connected to Center for Sustainable Change. I wrote a blog about it, which is on their website. And then I understand with my daughter, I was driving myself crazy. Oh, how can I help her? What can I do? I mean, she was totally
Destroyed.
I can't even think of a word to describe how she was feeling. But one of the things I learned about how I could support her was just to listen to her. Instead of telling her, well, maybe you should try this, maybe you should do this. No, my job was to listen. Because I had no idea how she felt. I just knew how I felt. But I felt so much better. I was in a different space. And she worked through it. She worked through it so much. I mean, I've shared bits and pieces with her about the 3 principles. I haven't shoved it down her throat, but she's noticed that, she said, Mommy, you're so much nicer now. I don't think I've changed, but she's eased out of it. She eased out of it so much that she was able, with her husband, to go on to a very popular radio station in New York, and both of them talked about that experience. She's written a book about the experience. And I mean, when Jean Catherine asked me to, I was also on Jean Catherine's podcast because she read my blog. And she said, well, you're so happy now, you know? And I am. I mean, you know, I have the wonderful memories of my granddaughter, and she is where she is, and I'm not driving myself crazy anymore. I do think of her, and I'll get this feeling in my chest, but I'm not having conversations in my head about it anymore. And to me, that's been a tremendous growth, which I truly owe to my understanding of the 3 principles. So that's my story.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
So this is a personal bout. So what I struggle with is it seems like I just kind of can't get over it. It's not like I've had this, I mean, I just have my trauma, but it's, I'm pretty good in most of my life, pretty much all of it, except for when I'm with somebody that's in distress, and I just want to fix and help. And like I want to teach the principles, and that's like the worst thing to do, and I know that, and the irony doesn't pass me by as I'm sitting here trying to teach him to trust yourself, that I'm totally gone because I'm so scared or I don't know what to do, and I really get it, but I just feel like if I could just see my own, that I'm okay, and I could see it in there, but like I don't see it. And I just like, you know, I mean, my trauma was just childhood dyslexia in a system that didn't know about that.
Right.
A really mean second grade teacher that would humiliate you if you made a mistake. You know, it's not like it's been any, you know, I had good parents, and I was kind of at the end of the family, and so there wasn't a lot of, I just followed.
Yeah.
And so when I'm always looking for somebody big to come help me.
Yeah.
Somebody to be with me and teach me, and like I'm just always searching. As I listen to the talks, I like want to write down, now how did they say it? What do how can I do it like that?
Yeah.
You know?
So,
So
first of all, everything that you are looking for is in you. There's nothing wrong with you, and you can't fix what isn't broken. You cannot fix what isn't broken. You can notice that it isn't broken, because we can think that it is. You know, you're going through what a lot of the girls that I work with went through, that thinking after, you know, becoming a prostitute and all the things that they went through and all the terrible, I won't go into it, but, you know, that they're damaged somehow and that something in them is broken and they'll never be whole again. But you can't break what doesn't need to be fixed, and no one can touch your soul. That's the gift that we're all born with. We're born with that perfection. So when you get worried about yourself, what you're really doing is thinking of things that might be wrong with you, but they're not. Because we all do that. It's sort of like going to the grocery store and thinking, well, I can't, know, how can I, every time I leave the grocery store, I forget I was going to get bananas and I have to go back. You know, well, that's just one of those things. And we get caught up in our own thinking sometimes. So that's number one. But the number two thing that I can tell you, what I learned early on, because I remember when I was, you know, a student of a psychiatrist, I knew nothing about the mental health field at the time. It was before I got my doctoral degree. And I was a business person who had been a newspaper reporter, you know, so like, what did I know? And I'm watching him work with clients, and I'm seeing these miraculous things happening, and I'm asking myself, what did he do? Well, he didn't do anything, you know, but what I noticed is that he listened, and he showed such love for those people, such respect for them. And I realized for most people that have been judged or diagnosed or labeled, that's what they think is broken, and nobody respects them anymore, and people, they come to identify with their brokenness, and when someone looks at them with passion and love and caring and says, no, you're whole, it's okay, they find it in themselves. And that's the gift that anyone can give. You don't have to know the 3 principles to know love. It helps to know that you can always find it again. The principles help you with that, but to know love, you don't need that. You just need to know love. But first, you know, love is, you're born in it. You're born in that love. That love is part of you. And when we stop loving ourselves, and I don't mean, you know, the kind of love that go, I look really good today, man, I'm hot. You know, I'm not talking about that kind of love. I'm talking about just seeing, wow, I'm alive. I'm a human being just like everybody else. I'm part of it all, you know, I'm dancing with everyone, I'm in the joy. Wow, you know, it's awesome. and when you find that for yourself, you know, it doesn't matter what you're doing or what you're thinking or whether you pass this test or that test. It just, you know, you're just a part of the human race, and we're all in it together, and we're trying to share that beautiful feeling that's part of our gift. Yeah, Ryan.
Also, I want to add something to that. Just a reminder to you, but also to me and to everybody else, to kind of be gentle with ourselves, because we think things that are kind of scary, and we get kind of scared. And that's everybody. We all think stuff that's scary, and we all get terrified by it. It's not a personal failure on your part that in that situation you're unable to be how you want. That's everybody, right? So there's just a reminder to just be gentler with yourself of that. And sometimes when we're so desperate to change how we show up somewhere, we get more and more anxious, right? And less able to change, and less able to be helpful and present. And at some point, it might happen that you're just not going to be so afraid of feeling afraid anymore. You know, I mean, like, I realized that even with the earthquake, that there were times when I would be really afraid, but afraid that I would feel afraid if something terrible happened. Right? Not necessarily just afraid that the thing might happen, but afraid of how afraid I would be. Right?
That's a good point.
And just a reminder that, I mean, we think things that are scary and we don't like it. And that's totally cool. That's everybody. Everybody does that.
As I was listening to your comments, I was reminded of my unsuccessful attempts in the past to get a bird untrapped from a building. I've got a big shop on our farm area, and a bird will get in there somehow. And anyway, I've tried a net and things, and they're just thrashing around, and I'm desperate. And then someone just says, well, let's turn all the lights off and open a window and shine a light outside the window, and they find their way home. And so we all want to help when someone's having trouble, and so it's you just have to really trust that how can I best help, and by keeping yourself centered and your light as bright as possible.
And they do find their way home. That's true. Helen. Oh, I'm sorry. Helen.
As you were speaking and talking about that, I grew up with domestic violence and got into 3 abusive relationships. One ended me up homeless with my children in a battered women's shelter. But prior to going into that, right after coming out of that battered women's shelter, I had a nervous breakdown because of all the abuse and all the things that was going on in my head. And when I walked into this, my doctor told me that she was going to send me to another doctor because I needed another doctor. I said, okay, that's fine. It was a psychologist. So now I started beating myself up and saying, wait a minute, I'm crazy. And my ex-husband was always reminding me how crazy I was. So now I'm really buying into this, that I'm crazy. And I started thinking that and having panic attacks and everything. And this was before I knew the principles. And my first episode of knowing, and once I learned the principles, I realized that I had been in a good place before, and that was in that psychiatric ward. So when I walked in the psychiatric ward, and I got in there, and all these women and men were sitting in there, and they were just, out of it because they drugged up and all this. And I have a thing about my hair. My hair got to be in place, I have a hair thing. And back then my hair was long, and I came in with my curling iron and all this. So all these women were sitting around, and they, all zonked out and hair everywhere. Even the white women had nappy hair. It was a mess. So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, I looked around, and I was like, this hair got to go. I'm taking Xanax and Tomfenil and doing my group counseling and all this stuff. And I said, come in my room. I got curling iron and stuff. And I had been a nurse's aide for, 16 years, so I could wash anybody's hair and do anybody's hair. So I went in there, and they had told me I was going to be in there for 2 months. When they admitted me, I'd be in the hospital. That's how bad it was for 2 months. So I started doing their hair and everything, and every morning everybody coming in, I'd wash and curl the hair and everybody. So then next thing you know, we were playing cards and we were listening to the radio, and everybody was all upbeat and all this here. And I was just having a good time because now I'm taking care of everybody. I forgot that I was
Crazy.
Depressed, having panic attacks, and having all this stuff because I took myself off of my mind, off of me and my issues. Well, I was only in there 2 weeks because I was cleaning out the place. They thought everybody, they getting you up out of here because everybody was feeling better. And I mean, they were. I was only in there 2 weeks. My 2 months turned to 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then later on, when I learned the principles, I realized what happened.
Yeah.
I took my mind off of what I couldn't do. I took my mind off of how I had been abused. I took my mind off of the limitations I had put on myself. It wasn't there. And I realized the power of thought. If I think I can't do it, you won't do it. If I think I'm crazy, I was crazy. I was only crazy for 2 weeks and got out of it. I was supposed to be committed for 2 months. So that was the most powerful thing that this understanding has done to me. Is that it's just a thought, and thoughts are not that deep.
Yeah. They're right behind you, Anita. There's a, right here. Yes.
I think what I'm about to say is just a follow-up on you, that whatever we feel or think or experience are just temporary. So even on the topic of trauma, I come from Nepal too, so we lived through the earthquake together. I was traumatized. I have 3 kids, so my thoughts were always for my kids. So several months I couldn't sleep because I was expecting it to shake and the house to fall down any moment. So I kind of got over it eventually. But what I'm going to talk about is not the earthquake or the other insurgencies, but My work basically back in my hometown was following stories, inspirational stories, positive stories. And in that process, Nepal is a country which lacks in many areas, and of course equality is a big issue. So women still have to struggle to make themselves seen, heard, or even like accepted as equals. So I work with a lot of women, and the topic of trauma brought to my mind many stories, and I was deciding on which story to share. But I think like the story I would like to share today is about a woman who is from eastern Nepal, and she was from a very poor family, and of course when you're married you depend on your husband, so he's the breadwinner, and however he decides to treat you, you just have to accept, and then whether you get beaten or whether the husband has affairs, you just keep shut. So the story of the woman was the same. She was married to a man who didn't love her, and eventually he had another wife outside of his home, and the new wife was so jealous of the old wife that together they conspired and then threw acid on the wife's face. So she was of course disfigured, and for many months she just shut herself off from the whole of society. And then a community there, that is the Dhankuta community, I can connect with Mahima, they decided to go talk to the woman, and eventually they brought her out of her home. And then they have little training programs for women who are battered. So she joined one of the groups, which was a community savings group. And then, like you said, she forgot about her own personal trauma when she joined the group, and she became so empowered that she became a very active member of that group. And with the training and, of course, the employment that she got there, she was able to stand on her own and earn her own living. And then when she did that, the husband had the audacity to come back to her and say, "Oh, I asked for your forgiveness," because he was in need of money. And his intention was to ask for a loan from the very wife on whom he had inflicted the violence. And guess, how many can guess what this woman did? Would she have forgiven him, or would she have shut the door on him? I don't know what I would have done. I probably wouldn't have that heart to forgive him, but this woman eventually gave her husband not a loan, but some capital money to start afresh. So when we invited her to our event where we share such kind of stories, people were stunned to know what she had done. So there's trauma in her life, there's forgiveness, there's love, and there's always a new beginning. And I think when you let go of all these past ghosts or skeletons, you're so much more happier, better equipped to deal with life. So yeah, that's one of the stories that I have. And I have so many stories in my head, but that would take
That's a beautiful story.
so many hours. Yeah, so yeah, one of the reasons that I'm here at the awesome event is because I like that, what you say there, awakening the human potential for inspiration, because that's what I've been searching for all my life. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's beautiful. Nate.
That gives me hope. And I've heard a constant throughout this panel and at the beginning, and that constant for me is love. And through that love that you just shared with us through that young lady, anything is possible. So when I hear these stories of triumph through love, it just takes me up another level, you know? And so my understanding of the principles is truly based on that foundation of love, that if I continue to have faith in that and continue to practice that, and that's the hardest part, is to consistently practice unconditional love, because some people are really hard to love. And I struggle with that. And instead of beating myself up, I just try to step back and observe myself from afar and say, okay, what would you like for someone to do in this situation? And that's what really, truly happened for me when my younger brother, after my entire family had turned their backs on me, that younger brother just listened and listened and listened and didn't judge me and said, you know what, just whatever you need in order to get your life back together, I'm here. And for the first time, no one was telling me, well, you're this and you're that. You should have done this. How could you let your life go to crap? How could you be addicted? How could you go to jail? How could you do all these things? And I just shut everybody down.
Sure.
And who did I go out and beat on? Me. And until I learned how to love me, only then was I open to the love that this younger brother showed me. And that was before I even knew anything about the principles, which goes back to us knowing something, there's something there in all of us when we're born that, we all have it. We just lose touch with it by stacking on all this stuff, and once we realize that it's there, now I can confidently understand that, yes, I can love that person who is just throwing this hate out there. I don't have to try and debate the hate. I just show and give love. And from places that I have no clue where they come from, it confirms it every time that wisdom shows up. And when it shows up, you know it.
Yep.
And that's what anybody who is new in the principles, trust it.
Trust it.
Trust it. It comes every single time.
I wanted to share something really quick, piggyback on what he said. Thank you. I like to play with words and acronyms. So I have an acronym for love or unconditional love, LOVE, and it's life's only vital energy.
Beautiful.
I'll throw one more in. A friend of mine, when I told him about, life's only vital energy, he said, oh, great. He has an acronym for life. Love in full expression. So I wanted to just share that.
That's beautiful.
Yes. Isn't
I
it?
want to remember that.
Yes. Pass it on.
Yeah.
There's somebody-
Heather has another comment.
Everything that I'm hearing, I'm trying to think about what I can do and what blocks I may have, particularly with my students who may have come from traumatic experiences and come to the classroom to either get attention or whatever they're needing to do to fix in themselves what they think they need to fix. So I'm thinking, okay, so what can I do if somebody walks in my classroom, when students walk in the classroom, and they come in the classroom maybe saying something that's not appropriate and loud. If I can say, I love you too, or something like that. I'm just trying to think of things that I could do to offset that. Because as much as I understand, we are working on restorative practices at our school.
Oh, beautiful.
And I felt that this is all about love. I felt that, but I'm not sure of how to implement that in a child's life to help them to basically, I guess, be respectful of all the things that I think they should be, I guess. Which is not
Well,
good.
as a person who's been in a lot of school situations and worked with a lot of teachers and worked with a lot of unruly people, I can tell you that, every teacher knows this saying that those who need love the most deserve it the least, and really my experience of children, young people, older people, anybody committing any kind of thing that's antisocial or unpleasant or violent to others or, intrusive, it's a cry for somebody, please listen to me. Please, they need love, they need attention, they need to know they're okay. Because I used to work with parents and I'd say, the worst thing a parent can say to a child is, what the hell is wrong with you? Because that's what the child is worried about. And if their parents, the place of last resort, don't know what's wrong with them, then what hope is there? But we do that. We don't mean to, but we say that as though there's something wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with anybody. So with a child like that, you'll know what to do when you have that feeling of love and you look at that child with love in your heart. Your wisdom will tell you what to do. And it'll be different for every situation and every child. There's no technique. There's just love as a feeling. And when that feeling is present, wisdom comes up. But I know, and I trust me, my experience with kids is there have been kids that I've worked with that have been, labeled emotionally upset, or they can't learn, or this one or that one. There's no such thing. There's no such thing. There are children who are suffering from their own insecure thinking about themselves and about life and about who they are and about what people think of them. And nobody can learn when their mind is full of churning thoughts about how terrible they are. Where's the space for the new learning? But when a child is at peace, when a child feels the love and respect from the adult, when a child feels that you believe that they can do it, they can do it. There's no question in my mind, because I've seen it again and again. I'm sure you have too, Helen. Yeah, maybe you want to.
West Virginia story right quick.
Yeah.
I came up to West Virginia and I worked with a program at the university for about, 5 years?
Yeah.
At least
Helen
4 or
was
5
a
years.
gift. Helen was our gift to West
and
Virginia.
When I first came in, I didn't know that where the kids came from. They came from mountains. So the black kids came from over here and the white kids came from another mountain or whatever.
Yeah.
So they didn't mingle. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So I came in with all this love. I'm going to help these kids and teach them about the principles. So when I came in, they all were sitting, the black kids on one side and the white kids on the other side. And I was like, well, we're going to talk about separate reality today. So I want you all to just get up and we're going to mix up. So I forget who it was that walked me in there, but somebody came in and I had all the kids had black, white, black, white, black, white, black, white. We were just all mixed up in there and we were just talking and having a good time. So the lady came in, she said, how'd you do that? And I said, how did I do what? They together. How'd you put the kids together like that? And I said, I just told them, you get up, you sit here, you get up. You sit down, you get up. And
Real
I said,
simple.
well, they're not supposed to do that, But they all felt love from me because I walked in, didn't see any of them any different.
Yeah.
Didn't know that I supposed to keep them separated. And then as they started working in their groups, they realized they had more in common than they ever knew. Because nobody had even put them together to know. And by the end, they were buying my book. Remember I had my little book? The kids were buying the book. I could got my
And not only that, but they kept in touch.
Yeah. Afterwards. So I think even when we as teachers or someone that's sharing come in with the love will just overflow the room. Mm-hmm. It's not about how I do with each one. It's what I'm bringing to the table. Mm-hmm. And that you'll draw out of them what you want. Because if I come in already, I got this, they got these, I'm going to put that energy out there. Mm-hmm. And that's what I've learned in working with kids, is that I'm going to get what I put out. Mm-hmm. If I already have expectation it's not going to go right, it ain't going right. Mm-hmm. If I come in there and, not today, we're going to have us a good time, we have a ball. Mm-hmm. So I think that's it. I think it's no set way you can say how to do it, other than to get in the presence yourself, and it'll flow.
Thank you.
He also, to me, love and presence are just very intelligent, right? And I think the same potential that we say other people have to change, that same potential is also creativity. It's intelligence in a moment, to know what somebody might need, whether you might need to change track. So I think, this desire to want to have the right thing to say and to help, probably the best route to that is just presence or love, because if you're there, you can see better, right? And if you can see them better and you can hear them better, you can make more intelligent choices about what it is they might need. Because every single method, every right word to say is going to be wrong at some point. It's just going to be, right? So, but if you're present and you're looking and listening, then you know, or maybe this is a useful track, right?
We have reached the hour, 3 o'clock, but I am excited about continuing this discussion and sharing with each other. This is very rich. I've benefited a lot already from this.
Me too.
Thank you all for being here. And let's have a break, and we will gather again later this afternoon. It'll be the last one today. We look forward to.
We'll
we
keep
look
it a
forward-
little lighter.
Yeah,
Yes.
We'll let Miss Helen talk more.
Do you want to swap places for the last session?
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
But now I need to say, though, that I, honestly, if you want to know how to work with kids that are struggling, go talk to Helen. Because I've seen her just create miracles, and it's all pure love. Yeah.
Thank you.